have made a chart, and it includes 5 key aspects of a story. Generally, what I do when I'm trying to find a pattern is I will analyze different stories that I know are really successful, that I personally really enjoyed, and I try and see what they all have in common. So when I'm struggling with writing my book and trying to understand what elements to include, especially when it comes to thematic significance, I always look to the patterns of other successful works. The 5 categories are the perceived antagonist and or problem. The second one is real or larger antagonist and or problem. The third is the foil character. The fourth is the main themes of the book. And the fifth is the fundamental desire pushing the protagonist on. And what's crucial about this fundamental desire is often we think of our characters, our protagonists, needing to learn something, and the want versus the need. They want something, but they actually need something else. And that's what they need to learn throughout the story. However, what I found is that this fundamental desire they have is deep down what is creating this maybe unhealthy want, or this want that's not actually what they need. But when they do get what they need, or they learn what they need to learn, we find that actually the want and the need aren't so different when it comes to the desire at the core of them. Basically, the fundamental desire that is pushing the protagonist onwards is something that they need to accomplish, but they just need to go about it in a different way. So it's less about what they desire being flawed, and more about the way in which they pursue it that is flawed. So for example, I'm going to go through each of the categories in different examples so we can see how that applies to our own stories. A good story I always like to use when I'm finding patterns in successful books is The Hunger Games. We're going to go to the first category, the perceived antagonist and or problem. What I mean by that is the heart of the story, the action, the premise. With The Hunger Games, the perceived antagonist and or problem it's the Hunger Games themselves, it's the games. The premise of the story is that she is thrown into these games and she has to fight to the death. We learn later that there is a deeper cause to this problem. When we dig deeper, then we find that there's a larger or more powerful antagonist or villain. So what's also important to consider with this first category is that the problem triggers the fear of the protagonist. So it triggers their deep fundamental fear. Katniss's fundamental fear is for her family, and she wants to be able to be there to take care of her family. She's worried something's going to happen to them if she's not there. Being forced to go away from her family and participate in these games and potentially not survive triggers her fear of not taking care of her family. She's afraid she won't be able to be there for them. And now we're going to link that to the fundamental desire that is pushing the protagonist on throughout the story. And that is actually something they need to accomplish. That desire is not wrong, but the way they go about it is misguided. So this is the pattern I found, right? Is that the fundamental desire reflects this sort of fundamental fear. When we look at the fundamental desire, Katniss's is her loved one's safety and pursuing her duty. So she needs to pursue this, she just needs to go about it in a different way. The reason she needs to go about it in a different way is she needs to make room for herself and her morals, her humanity. It's okay to pursue her loved one's safety, and it's okay to pursue her duty, but she needs to not sacrifice these key parts of what it means to be human. Therefore, the fundamental desire is parallel to the perceived problem and what fear it triggers. So the next category is the real or larger antagonist and or problem. I mentioned that the Hunger Games themselves are actually caused by something greater. When we think of the real villain or the larger villain or the cause of this problem that the character can easily see, we think of the Capitol and President Snow. He is the one to actually cause this whole problem in the first place. He's the one in control. And another pattern is that this real antagonist, or the larger problem, reflects the main theme, or one of the main themes. The main themes that I perceived from the Hunger Games were humanity and emotion, and freedom and love, not just surviving and protecting, but also truly living. Some of these themes are reflected in the real or larger antagonist or problem. The Capitol and President Snow reflects the main struggle of heartlessness and lacking humanity, a main theme being preserving your humanity and emotion and empathy. The real or larger antagonist and problem reflects what can happen as a result of completely losing this thing that the protagonist needs to learn. This is the worst possible scenario of what the protagonist could turn into if they don't learn their lesson. Because President Snow is the epitome of heartlessness and lacking humanity, just sort of shutting down. Then the final category we're going to look at is the foil character. I noticed this pattern and posted it on TikTok, and someone actually pointed out to me like, hey, what you're describing is a foil character. And I did not realize, so I'm very thankful to that person. The foil character is essentially a character who is basically on par with the protagonist and is not above them in any way. That's my perspective, at least. And they reflect the anti or opposite characteristics of the protagonist. But what I found further is that the foil character represents a lesser version of the large antagonist, and what can happen if they don't realize one of the main themes or one of the main lessons that the protagonist needs to realize. In other stories, there's different themes reflected in the larger antagonist and the foil character, but with the Hunger Games specifically, I found that the foil character also reflects the same main theme. The foil character in the Hunger Games is Cato, if I'm remembering correctly, and Cato is basically same age, same situation, where he's put in the Hunger Games, except the difference is he's been training for this for a while. And he seems ruthless. He wants to win. He wants to be here. Cato is kind of Katniss if she played into the game and forgot her humanity. But he's not President Snow, you know? So he is kind of the lesser version of that, but he is involved in one of the obstacles that Katniss has to face.